Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Welcome to Inside Outer Limits. Once again, and this is another episode in the what seems like the never-ending Inside Outer Limits radio show. And today, I'm very glad to say, I'm joined by my co-host, who's actually been a little bit unwell over the last few weeks, and you'll probably realise that if you're a regular listener, because we've been playing one or two of the older episodes that we've put together. Now, when I say older, there's nobody older here than I think my co-host, so there you go. How are you doing, Phil? How are you keeping?
Good evening, Chris. Thank you very much. Better than I have been, and I've made a special effort tonight to speak to an old friend of mine, not spoken to in quite a long time, and I can guarantee that the listeners are going to learn something in this next couple of hours.
That's brilliant. That's great to hear. Now, this special guest, I remember actually coming to a UFO conference put on, was it by Data or Matrix magazine, where he actually spoke in the hotel near the M62, not far from where Outer Limits magazine is doing its conference this year.
Yeah, UFO Data magazine that used to be edited by Russell Magazine, and it was a little hotel that was just at the side of Pontefract racecourse, just as you come off the motorway. It's no longer there now. It went bust, I think, and just fell down in the end, which is a shame because it was a nice place.
Yeah, it is a shame. Would you like to do the introduction then, Phil, seeing as he's an old friend of yours and you've known him, I think a couple of years at least?
Yeah, well, I am delighted to speak to my old friend Brian Allan tonight. It's difficult to introduce him because he's a man who's done so much, and is a chap. If you ever get a chance to listen to, be it on a podcast or in person, I would advise you to go along and do so. You may not always agree with Brian, but I guarantee you'll learn something from him, and that includes me as well. So it was one of the reasons why, Brian was on our list of speakers at certain events. And he certainly never let us down. And so it's a welcome to my old friend Brian from Scotland. Good evening, Brian.
Well, good evening, Phil, and thank you very much for having me on board. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
You're very, very welcome, Brian. You're very welcome indeed. Now, I do know that you're, as Phil has just said anyway, that you're a man of many parts, really.
Yeah.
I know you, really, as editor-in-chief of Phenomena magazine, is that correct?
Yeah, currently Phenomena magazine, but prior to that, I was editing Paranormal magazine. I did that until it sort of went defunct. It was just when the recession hit, in point of fact, that the guy who owned it, a guy called Dave Franklin, he just sort of pulled it because it wasn't making a profit, and that was it. So, and at the time, I had been getting I had people that were writing stuff for me at the time, Steve Meara in particular, and Steve asked me would I like to come on board as a sub-editor of Phenomena, and then shortly after that he said, well, do you want to just edit the whole thing and I'll step back and do other stuff? And I said, yeah. So I've been editing it for the past 7-8 years, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, we interviewed Steve a few weeks back, Brian, and he pretty much said that. He said Brian were doing a better job than me, so he says it just made sense to say leave you to it, Brian, and I'll go along and do other things. But he did sing your praises, mate. He really did.
And it didn't cost me very much to get him to say that either, I can assure you.
So, Brian, we've all got something that brought us into this this fascinating world that we call ufology, and mine was an experience back in 1974 when I saw a set of unusual lights moving across the night sky. What brought you into the subject?
Well, let me just put it this way. I'm 75 years of age now, okay? Now, what got me into the subject took place 72 years ago, and I can remember it as if it was yesterday. It's etched into my mind. It's absolutely there. When I saw something in my bedroom, I woke up. It was early morning. The sun was streaming through the window, and in fact, I'll tell you how young I was. I was still in a cot. There you go, because I can see the bars of the cot in front of me. And just maybe about 3 or 4 feet from the cot, my father, believe it or not, had a baby grand piano. He was a musician all his life, and he had a baby grand piano in the bedroom. And between my cot and the baby grand piano, there was a figure standing. Be about 4 foot high. It was dressed all in green. It had the thing that was really strange about it was the belt, a very elaborate belt with a very strange, it wasn't really a buckle, I'm not sure what it was, but it was a belt of some kind with some sort of device at the waist. And it was standing with its arms folded, and it was watching me. And I remember I wasn't frightened. I just wasn't frightened. I closed my eyes and opened them again. It was still there. But it didn't present any threat. So I simply just went back to sleep again. And when I woke up, I'd gone, obviously. But yeah, I woke up and there was something watching me. And you could interpret it as I don't know, it wasn't a ghost. There was nothing ghostly. This was solid, absolutely solid, green, or dressed in a one-piece green tunic or overall, certainly one piece. Strange, folded arms, this strange belt buckle, and was watching me. But anyhow, I went to sleep and woke up, it had gone. But it's ever since then, I've had this interest. And oddly enough, a couple of nights later, a couple of mornings later, I had an extremely vivid dream. Again, I can remember this like it was yesterday, and again, you're going back like 72 years. And I can remember this like it was yesterday again, that I had a dream of a UFO, okay, a traditional, flying saucer, disc-shaped flying saucer. And this is before you were getting all this stuff put out in the press. This is long before this ever hit the press, or pictures of them. But I saw this disc-shaped UFO, and it was coming for me. Okay, I knew it was coming. It was going to take me on board it. And it was since then that I tied the two things together, and I just wondered if I was being contacted for some reason. But yeah, that is what got me involved in this. And like I say, it was just like it happened yesterday.
That's fascinating. As soon as you said to me 4 foot in height, it was. I had this picture in my head of this typical grey type alien. Was it something like that?
No. I couldn't see the face because it just the way the blanket was like partly covered my eyes, and I could scan it up and down. I could see to its chin, but it was flesh coloured. I mean, it wasn't grey in colour; it was flesh coloured. But I couldn't see the full face, but I could see everything from the chin down. And I say it didn't seem to be. It wasn't skinny like a grey. It wasn't like very thin. The thin limbs. It was in proportion. It was slim and in proportion, I would say. But I don't think it was a grey. But then again, I couldn't see the face, so I can't say 100% certain. But I don't think it was.
That's fascinating. Have you wrote about this experience in any of the books that you've put out?
I think it's mentioned in what. Now, don't ask me which one. But I've written 12 of them, and I do mention this. Yeah, I do specifically talk about this event, which got me on board. But I've had the odd things have happened since then. Some amazing synchronicities. Well, I'll give you an example of the kind of thing that happens to me on a fairly regular basis. A couple of years ago, a year ago in point of fact, I was building a PowerPoint for a presentation I was giving. And the radio was on in the room. I've got my little man cave in the back of the house here. I've got all my computers and stuff, and my phones and bits and bobs. And I was just the cursor on the screen. It was Aleister Crowley, the sort of late Victorian sorcerer and magician. I was incorporating him into the presentation, and I'd been looking up images of him on the net to include in the PowerPoint. Well, as soon as I hovered the cursor over his face, from the radio, bellows Ozzy Osbourne shouting Mr. Crowley. And I went, wow, how about that? And the next thing, the following day, on the same presentation, I was doing stuff, and it was to do with a bomber, in point of fact. And the cursor hovered over the picture of this World War II bomber, and from the radio shouts, the bomber, and it was Lemmy, Lemmy and Motorhead.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. And I just look up when this sort of thing happens and I just say, thanks. Thanks very much. I know you're watching and doing this stuff. Yeah. It's a bit like the cosmic joker seems to have his eye on this sort of thing. And I've just stopped questioning it now, because I've found that if I'm looking for information for something happened to a writing, or I'm seeking something, I'll guarantee you it will crop up. It'll come on the radio. I'll see something on the TV, or I'll pick up something in my inbox, and it'll be relating to what I'm looking to. So it's almost as if the cosmic joker's out there, and he's trying to help me, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
That's fascinating. Now, there are some people who believe, that our visitors travel to us through portals. Mm-hmm. There are some people who still believe in the nuts and bolts theory of our visitors and the craft. What's your personal view, Brian?
Well, this is where possibly Phil and I might disagree a little bit, because...
Shall I get the boxing gloves ready, guys?
No. Phil and I are both on the same side of the fence here. And Phil's well aware of it. It's just I have issues with where these things originate. That is the only issue I have. I think these things are travelling multidimensionally. I don't think they're travelling in any linear fashion from A to B, put it that way. I think if they are coming through, they're coming through, we would call a portal, a doorway, a gateway, an interdimensional gateway of some kind. But it's odd you should say this, Chris, because Steve, myself, and a guy called Barry Fitzgerald, we've both been working on aspects of this. And one of the aspects we've been working on is the curious link between areas of geomagnetism and appearance of UFOs and other sort of paranormal type events. Because it appears that there are a very, very high percentage of these incidents take place where there are incidents of geomagnetism in the Earth. Now, the Skinwalker Ranch is a case in point. It's slap back in the middle of an area of geomagnetism. Now, the other thing that I've come across, and no later than just the other week, there's an area about 20 miles from where I live. It's called Cairnpapel Hill. It's in the Bathgate Hills, as I say, about 25 miles away. And it is actually a Neolithic burial site, which is also right on the edge of an area of geomagnetism. Now, the thing is, there's been a thing seen up there repeatedly by different people over the years. The most recent one that I came across was in 2007. Now, the guy that I got this information out through my granddaughter, who's a chemist, and her boss, she works for a firm called Merck, and her boss had this experience in 2007 when he was still a youngish guy, and he was driving with three of his friends in his car, and they were driving close to where Cairnpapel Hill is, in the Bathgate Hills. Then all of a sudden, they saw this thing out the side of their eye. This thing emerged from the left-hand side of the road, and they said it was absolutely translucent. It was humanoid, it was moving very fast, and it was translucent. And I thought, wow, and they just got the hell out of there as quickly as they could. And after they drove on a little bit, they said, did we actually see something there? And they talk, yeah, well, I think we did, and they described what they'd seen. Well, they drove back, and as they rounded a corner onto the stretch of road where they'd seen this thing, lo and behold, in the middle of the road, it was standing right in front of them in the middle of the road. And as the car approached it, the guy panicked, and rather than just try and swerve, he put his foot to the boards, and the car shot forward. Well, as they got within inches or feet of this thing, it shot up straight in the air, whoosh, just vanished up. It vanished when it shot in. Anyway, they went home, spent the night talking about it, and the guy went back himself on his own in his car. Went for about a couple of weeks, and every time he went back onto the stretch of road, he saw this thing, but it was never in the road, and it was never like close to him. It was always in trees, but he could always see this thing. And eventually he just sort of got bored of it and just gave it up. And I think he went back fairly recently and didn't see it again. But this thing that they saw, the humanoid, a guy called Dave Coleman, a guy that I've known for years again, he saw this thing as well, but he didn't say it was grey translucent. He said he called it the Silver Man. That he and his wife and 2 kids, again, were driving on exactly the same stretch of road. When they looked out the car window, the side windows, and there was something in the fields, and it was running at the same pace as the car, which was doing at 50 miles an hour. Now this thing's running at the same speed as the car, and he accelerated, and the thing ran at the same speed as the car, and it got a bit closer to them, even though it was still running alongside them in the fields. And although they couldn't see the face because it had no face, it was bright silver, and every time it turned towards them, they got this distinct impression of menace. And then it just sort of disappeared. And he has no recollection of getting home that night, none whatsoever. His wife can't remember it, and the kids can't remember it. All they know is they saw this thing, then they were home. And they can't fill in the space of the length of time, about the half hour that would have taken them to drive from where they were to get to home again. They had no idea, they just hadn't, they just can't, they've got missing time, for want of a better word. But this area, and I've done a bit of asking, people who live up there, and apparently this area is notorious for this or something being seen up there. And I've mentioned this to Barry, I've mentioned this to Steve, and we're going to be looking at it because Barry and his wife are going to be coming across next month from Ireland, from Sligo, and they're going to be staying with me for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look up to Cairnpapple Hill and the surrounding area. And the other thing he wants to do is have a look at Rosslyn Chapel with me, because one of my other, but I think the only thing about my claim to fame, if you like, is that I discovered what became known as the Rosslyn frequency. Because I think there's a portal inside Rosslyn Chapel, and I'm not winding you up about this. I'm almost certain there's a portal in there, and because the whole chapel reacts to a specific frequency of sound, and it lights up sonically. And there's a particular area in the east end of the chapel. It's called the Lady Chapel, and there are 3 small altars up there. The one on the left-hand side in the Lady Chapel is called the St Matthew altar, because as well as being Rosslyn Chapel, it's also called the Collegiate Church of St Matthew. And it's a functioning Episcopalian church. And, they still have services and stuff, so it does function as a church. But this left-hand altar, the St Matthew altar, I am absolutely certain that there's a portal right in front of that altar. I say this because back in, let me say, it wouldn't be 2005. That was the last time we were up actually carried out an investigation. But this would be about 2000, 2001. When we really started taking an interest in the place. This is when you could still get access to it, because they just won't let people into, if you like, experimenting there anymore. They put us to it. But the time we were in there in 2001, it might have been 1990, it doesn't really matter. It was the first time we actually carried out an investigation there. It's mentioned in one of my books called Rosslyn Between Two Worlds. And I was standing, this medium, with 2 sets of mediums with us. Me, 2 sets of mediums, my wife, and my wife. And we were taking them around individually, the 2 sets of mediums. Now, the 2 sets of mediums had never been in Rosslyn Chapel before, and they'd never met before. It was 2 husband and wife teams. Now, but they both picked up individually that there was an area in front of this St Matthew altar that was very, very special. There was something very strange about it. So one of the mediums, Anne-Marie Lochhead, as it happens, is her name now. She got married, and she said, stand with your back, stand against the altar. So I stood with my back against the altar. Now, it's not, I said, they're only, it came up to just below my shoulder blades, I guess. They're not big, high altars. They're quite small. And I was standing with my back to this thing, then all of a sudden I realised I was getting pushed up from the floor. And I'm serious about it. I was actually coming up from the floor. So Anne-Marie said, close your eyes. And she started doing stuff. My wife was filming all this. She had all this on videotape. And whatever she was doing, I suddenly realised that this impression of getting lifted from the floor was getting stronger and stronger. And it was like the best way I can describe this to you is this, that imagine you're standing and there's something pushing you up from the heels, right? It's pushing you up from the floor. And that's what I felt like. And I came off the floor and sort of fell forward. And Anne-Marie said, she said, whoa, steady. I said, yeah, what was that all about? Well, she said, the portal was starting to open, and you were getting lifted up with it. Now, one of them saw this thing as a column of light coming from the floor, a silver light. The other medium saw it as a shimmering green curtain. But they both sensed there was something very special about this part of the chapel. Now, when we went back there in 2005, I'd devised a specific frequency, and we brought along. I'd downloaded a frequency generator from the internet, and I created. It's called an augmented fourth. I think it's C, F sharp, and G, and but yeah, I think that's it. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd need to check it. I'll tell you what it's. F sharp, C, and A. That's what it was. And I created the specific frequencies that correspond to these notes and made the chord. And when we started up, when we created it on the laptop that we bought with us, Anne-Marie said, she said, the portal is starting to open. So she went and stood with her back to the altar. And I stood about 4 feet from her, in front of her, facing her. And inside this area, it was almost like a box, for want of a better word, because it became very, very cold inside this particular area. And when you put your hands out from your sides, it's almost as if you could feel that they were passing through an interface of some kind on both sides. It was slightly warmer. You brought your fingers back in, and it became cold again. And a guy we had with us at the time, he came along, if you like, to help with us. He was actually a sonic therapist, and unbeknown to us, he went down into the crypt, below the chapel, and he started toning. So what you had was the sound coming from the laptop and the sound coming from the acoustic therapist. Now we're sort of looking at each other and I say, "Oh, yeah, that's clever." Well, all of a sudden, quite spontaneously, a third sound kicked off. Okay, we said, "Where the hell is that coming from?" Then a few seconds later, a fourth sound kicked off. They were almost like harmonics being created by the two separate notes. And the chapel was acting like a heterodyne device, and it was actually creating frequencies on its own. Now, the guy down the stairs didn't know anything about this. He just stopped toning, and the two resonant frequencies, the two harmonics, just stopped immediately. And all we were left with then was the laptop producing the original augmented fourth. So we sort of looked at each other and sort of scratched our heads and said, "Well, what's all that about?" So yeah, we couldn't do anything about it, anything more, because the people who run the chapel always get a bit edgy, or when they were still letting people do this. They don't let them do it now. But they started getting a bit edgy, and they sort of turned up to see what we were doing, because I think they wanted us out of there before the sort of paying guests turned up, because we'd been allowed in early, and we were given full access, to the chapel. But they were getting a bit edgy about all this, so they came down and just shut it down. So we had to stop doing it there. But yet the sound I was creating on the laptop was doing something to the chapel, and it was doing something to this area where we think this portal actually is. Pardon me. And
Excellent.
It was when the guy down the stairs, but what really put the tin hat in it was when the guy went down the stairs and started toning, and the chapel was creating two harmonics on its own, we decided that the chapel had actually been designed to do this. What it means, we don't know. And we haven't been able to carry out any further investigations since, so there it goes.
Yeah. Of course, the Rosslyn Chapel, it's got many different aspects associated with it, hasn't it? It's got the Knights Templars, the Ark of the Covenant. Yep. Also underneath, it is known there's a massive underground vault there.
Ooh.
And that was sealed, I believe, in 1690, has never been opened. What do you think's in there then, Brian? Do you think it's just a coffin in there, or do you think there's something else in there that's been hidden away?
Well, for a kick-off, there may be a vault underneath it, and it's a very hypothetical vault as well, because it is claimed that the chapel is as deep as it's high, put it that way. And if there is a vault under there, the foundations the chapel are built on might not be enough to support it if there was a particularly deep vault underneath it. Okay. Now, there is also, in Scotland, we have what's called the Act of Sepulchre. And this actually prevents people digging into graves just to see what's there, because a lot of people would like to do that. But it is claimed that the Barons of Rosslyn are in this vault, okay? And they're not in coffins. They're lying on stone biers in their full armour. And it is claimed that is what is down there. But I've heard everything from the Ark of the Covenant, the mummified head of Christ, the Holy Grail, everything's supposed to be down there. The treasure that the Templars brought back from Jerusalem. But Nobody knows for sure.
No, hold on a minute, Brian. I thought they were on Oak Island.
I know what's in the vault. It's Malcolm Robinson's checkbook.
Well, it's not been used very often.
Well, there you go, mate.
Was that printed in 1690 then?
If the Knights Templars actually did invent what we call banking and the first checks,
correct.
of course.
Yep.
That is correct.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you're talking about things happening by sort of in a synchronistic way, Brian.
Yeah.
I've got a pad in front of me, and when we do this show, I just write the guest's name down, and then a list of questions.
Uh-huh.
The only question I got written down for you was Rosalind Chapel.
Yeah. There's synchronicity for you then, yeah.
But going back to the portal thing, you may remember our old friend Albert Budden.
Yeah.
From some years ago.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you make to Albert's theory that we're not talking about portals or anything like that, that there are, locations like you've suggested that are geomagnetic and also man-made things like telephone masts and so on.
Yeah.
And the actual experiences are caused by this geomagnetic, but it's caused by people who are, he calls hypersensitive. In other words, they are allergic to this, the field. Sure. And of course, they have a very real experience, but that experience has no external force whatsoever. It happens internally. So it's not a portal to any other dimension or any other universe. It just happens there in that location. And that's why, according to Albert, of course, in certain areas around the world, they're called portals today. They used to be called window areas, 20, 30 years ago, and then something else. And they have a whole host, if you dig deep enough, of paranormal phenomena happen there. But it is location specific, and that is it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't communicated with Albert for many years now. But at one point we were in regular communication with one another, and I was willing to accept a lot what Albert said was true because he demonstrated it. He's demonstrated for the fact, that, for example, that magnetic fields can affect human perception, which they do. But the thing is, what I'm talking about again is areas of geomagnetism, which I'm not talking about just a little bit. I'm talking about acres wide, massive areas of geomagnetism, and it's in these areas that UFOs are seen, and it's in these areas that paranormal events occur. For example, what I said about this silver man, this grey man that these guys in the car saw. Now, the whole car full of guys saw them. It wasn't just one guy saw it. All four saw it, and they saw exactly the same thing at the same time. So something was happening there, and it's well worth, we think, investigating to see what the actual causal link is. Is it a glitch in the perception that we're actually, that Michael Persinger, that Professor Michael Persinger, and his God helmet thing, where he can produce various effects, but by activating the magnetic coils in the helmet. Well, it is possible that this is a subjective opinion or a subjective experience, but when the subjective experience is experienced by 4, 5, maybe 6 people at the same time, all seeing the same thing, then it starts to move into different territory, slightly different territory. There's another factor to look at in this, that a lot of these stone circles, and areas, especially like Karnak in France, where there are thousands of these standing stones, which you probably know about, many of these standing stones have been heat treated, for want of a better word, to reach their Curie point or Curie temperature. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but what happens is, if you heat a stone, say a stone block, this is just for example, you heat it. Now, the people, to get this at the temperatures required to do this, the fires would need to have been pretty specialised. Been a lot of fat, burning fat, different fibres and things to get the temperature right up. Because in their natural state, the stones may contain umpteen little, say, parts of, say, magnetite, for example, or magnetic particles, but they're all random, that they're randomly polarised. But what our ancestors seem to realise, that seem to know, is that when the stones were heated to their Curie point, their Curie temperature, they demagnetize. And if they laid them in a north-south axis, as they cooled down again, they remagnetized, but they polarized completely in a linear fashion. So the whole thing became, it was a more powerful magnet, shall we say, rather than little individual magnets. All the magnetic particles became polarized in the same north-south axis. And a lot of the stones, or hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the stones at Karnak, have had this done to them. It's almost as if they were trying to build up some sort of, I don't know, battery of some kind, like a natural source of geomagnetism. Why they did this, it's not clear. But it may be that shamans used it to try and communicate with other shamans elsewhere, or they were able to contact other realities, other dimensions, by using the effects of the magnetism on the brain. Because what is known is that mobile phones at certain areas of the Karnak stones just don't work because of the localized area of geomagnetism. And they know also that when sunlight comes up, it affects how these things function as well. So I think places like Avebury, you get this effect at Avebury, certain places, Stonehenge is another one where I think this can happen as well, that all these stones appear to have been, treated to create deliberate areas or deliberately geomagnetic objects where they're trying to enhance or exploit the inherent properties of the stone. But like I say, it's an area we're just starting to get our feet into now and find out more about. But I mean, I'd be glad to keep you updated when we do find a bit more about it.
That's fascinating, mate. I mean, I've visited a few of these, stone circles myself.
Yeah.
A few years back, I took my wife and my youngest daughter to Stonehenge, and they were completely underwhelmed. Is that it? And then we went to Avebury, and my daughter's saying, "What? Another rock, Dad? Another stone?" And I thought it was totally lost on them. But you're right. I think certainly with the area in and around Stonehenge. Archaeological discoveries in recent years have shown that it wasn't just a stone circle stuck in the middle of nowhere. There was a whole population that survived in and around the area.
Oh, yeah.
And not only that, they came from all over the place. I mean, It always amazed me. How would you know where to go?
Well, this is it. This is it, exactly. It'd be interesting to know. These things, as you rightly say, Phil, they weren't put there by accident. They were put there deliberately. Yeah. Now, if you go to Avebury, I mean, I've been, as you said, I've been to both places, and Avebury is absolutely amazing because I think it's the biggest circle of its kind in the world, if I remember rightly. It's absolutely, as you probably know, the village is partially inside it, if you want to put it that way. It's just an amazing place. And of course, Avebury and the surrounding area, you used to get a lot of the crop circles, but would appear there as well, if I remember correctly. And I don't think that was accidental either. I think it's a connection, or it's connected to the properties induced by the stones themselves. But you're getting into areas now that previously would have been called magic, and this is another area that I've been looking at, if you like, on my own, and I'll touch on it. A couple of my books touch on it.
Now, when you say magic, Brian, sorry to interrupt you, do you mean magic with a K?
Magic with a K, yeah, as in Crowley's spelling of magic, M-A-G-I-C-K, magic, yeah. I'm not talking about conjuring, I'm not talking about illusion, I'm talking about something very real here. And I think, again, this is pure, what I'm telling you now is pure, this is pure speculation. I mean, I can't back this up other than what I've found, connections that I've found. It would appear to me that there is a phenomenon that you've probably heard of called quantum entanglement. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that somehow some people can do this by an act of will. That somehow...
Brian, just for those that don't know, explain what quantum entanglement is, please.
Okay, fair play, mate, fair play. I'll give you an example of it then. That quantum entanglement... You may have heard, and your listeners may have heard of the twin slit experiment. Okay, that is where they shoot a photon, through a slit, and it hits two slits on the other side. Now, I can't remember what it's to do with interference patterns, but that isn't the point. What the photon does when it's observed is different from what it does when it's not observed. So somehow, that photon knows it's being observed, okay, and it reacts in a different way. And now, all the physicists hate this. They absolutely hate it because they know what happens and they don't know why. In fact, I saw a YouTube video of a guy called Jim Alkalili, and he was actually doing a demonstration of the twin slit experiment and showing that this effect actually took place. And he actually said on the YouTube video, if anyone has a logical explanation for why this happens, please let us know, because there's a Nobel Prize waiting for you if you can do it. Because even the physicists don't know why subatomic particles are affected by being watched. Right. Now, this is where I think that somehow at the subatomic level, particles can be affected. Some people are better at it than others. And I think that the more people that concentrate on something, on a particular function, can actually make it how you say, alter or make it happen more readily, shall we say. Because the more people are concentrating on this, the more observed these things are, so that the more these changes can take place. Now, I think Aleister Crowley, he actually described his version of magic as the act, I'm paraphrasing here, but he more or less said that it's the act of making reality bend to your will. Okay? You're willing change to take place, and it takes place. Now, again, I can't back any of this up. This is purely my own ideas, but I'm pretty sure that this effect is brought about by quantum entanglement. In other words, consciousness is entangling with the particles, and it's affecting what they do. And how you jack this up from the quantum level to the Newtonian level, if you will, I haven't a clue. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure this is how magic actually worked. And the only reason that magic stopped working is because we stopped believing that it would. And belief has got a lot to do with it as well. And it causes a lot of this stuff to flow more easily, if you will. But anyway, it's a subject that even I am not 100% sure what I'm talking about here. I mean, I can only go with what I've found and the similarities that I've seen. But yeah, I think magic, it's like Arthur C. Clarke said, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So perhaps magic, as it was practiced by our ancestors, was a form of technology we've just forgotten how to use.
Well, I've often wondered if it wasn't technology, Brian, but either I won't say powers, but it was abilities that we as human beings actually possessed, because we were less, in inverted commas, civilized. For example, I remember watching some wildlife program, and there's some guy up the Amazon somewhere with the tribesmen, and they still live, a tribal life.
Sure.
And off they went hunting one day at random through the forest. I mean, they went for miles, Brian, with their bows and arrows, and I think they shot a monkey or two.
Yeah.
And then they turned around and just walked back home. as if you're driving down the A1.
Sure, yeah.
And I remember an experiment, I believe, again, was done many years back. I think it was at Manchester University, where they got a group of students and they blindfolded them and put earmuffs on them and drove them around randomly so they wouldn't know where they were, and then got them out of the car, and they said, now we want you to point to where the direction you believe your home is. So they did that, and it was an astonishing amount, more than they expected, actually got it right.
Yeah.
More than you would have expected just by guessing. So it was almost if at some point we had an ability to be able to do these things. But of course, as mankind has progressed, it's like, the Amazons used to say that the edge of the Amazon rainforest was the end of civilization.
Sure.
And we class ourselves as civilized, and could it be, rather than technology, could it be abilities that we as a species had, but have since, lost through lack of use, or, as you say, lack of belief?
I think it's a bit of both, Phil. Lack of use, lack of belief. Our new isms have become scientism. That if it can't be proved scientifically, it doesn't happen. But we know that that's actually nonsense, because stuff continues to happen that isn't scientific in any way, shape, or form. And in spite of the best efforts of the scientists, we're able to do this stuff. For example, talk ghosts. It's not a problem. It's not a subject I'm too keen about, but ghosts, for want of a better word, because I'll use the term because people understand what I'm talking about, that ghosts continue to manifest and appear in spite of the best efforts of your James Randys and so forth and Psychop and all the rest of it, saying it's a load of old nonsense. But they still continue to appear. Why? What is a ghost? In fact, I'll tell you what, as you know, Brad Steiger, I think he died, was it last year he died, Brad? I think he did actually.
Yes,
last,
he did,
last
yes.
year. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Because I did a little piece in the magazine about him. But they asked me would I contribute to the last book that he and Sherry, his wife, wrote. And my contribution was, what is a ghost? And I did a little piece on that. And there was 2 or 3 other people that they knew that they asked to contribute a little bit to the book in one way, shape or form. And I tried to the best of my ability to say what a ghost was. That it was a remnant of consciousness. It was a consciousness that had, if you like, been, how can I put this? It was if consciousness doesn't die with the person. And it's a bit like energy. You can't create or destroy energy. You can only change it in form. That perhaps consciousness is a form of energy, and when the person dies, that their consciousness in some sense carries on. I've heard the stone tape theory, which makes a lot of sense as well, in that places become haunted because, if you like, the energy of the person or the event, which maybe it's a traumatic event, is actually, if you like, recorded in the stones of a building, and or maybe the earth under your feet. And under suitable circumstances, people who are sensitive enough can actually replay it a bit like a tape recorder of sorts. But as to what a ghost actually is, you'll get 10 people with 10 different ideas, and they're probably all right. But it's a completely fascinating prospect. But I used to go ghost busting. I used to do that on a fairly regular basis. I haven't done it for years now. I just stopped doing it because there comes to a point where you see stuff and you see the same thing happening time and time again. And it's not you become blasé, but you have to accept it for what it is. You don't know what it is. All you can do is it happens. Now, I'll give you an example of this. And this is an example. It appears in one of my books called Revenants, Haunted Places, Haunted People, and it's the event that took me right off the shelf as far as ghosts were concerned. And it was a hotel called the Highland Hotel in a little village in Stirlingshire called Doon. It's still there, I might add. Quite an old place. It dates back to the 1700s. And the woman in the place was having issues, shall we say, in the building. And it was friends of hers that knew what I did and said, would you go and have a word with her? And I said, yeah, why not? So I went across and interviewed her. And during the course of this interview, because we went back to actually carry out, if you like, the cleansing, I took 2 mediums with me, but we'll get to that. That she said, well, she told me we'd been happy. They'd heard voices talking when there was nobody in the pub. The place was empty. Things had been getting moved around. All sorts of really strange stuff. And the first thing that I said, whoa, is there something going on here? There's a short, when we went to our own quarters, her living quarters, which are quite a separate part of the hotel, there was a short flight of stairs went up to the attics. Now, I was standing on the, if you like, on the corridor, and she was going up the stairs, and she turned and looked at me. And it wasn't her. Her face changed. She became someone else, almost as if something had taken her over. And when I described the face that I saw, our daughter told me that's what the previous occupant of the hotel, the previous owner, had looked like. A Mrs. can't remember her name, doesn't really matter. But it sounded as if this older woman had taken possession of her. The woman wasn't aware of it, I might add. Marie Therese, I can't actually remember her name now. But she wasn't aware that I'd seen this, and she wasn't aware of it, that she'd been taken over, but it wasn't her on the staircase. She actually changed. Anyway, later on that same night, we went into her office. Our brother was there, our sister was there, and one of our employees was there. She was sitting about 6-7 feet from me on the other side of the fire. It was a winter's night, it was cold, the fire was on, central heating was on. And she's talking to me and she's telling me the stuff that was happening. And it was quite relaxed, and everybody was just nodding their head and listening and stuff. And I'm looking at her, then all of a sudden the room went cold. I don't mean it just got cooler, it went cold, bang. Just temperature went right down. The sound quality changed to almost an echoey sort of sound. And over her left shoulder, in the corner by the window, I could see a figure starting to form. But 6 foot high, humanoid shape, getting darker and darker and more dense as I watched. And I thought, I didn't say anything, but I thought, I'm not ready for this, go. Just get out of here, you shouldn't be here now, go. And as soon as I sort of thought that, the figure vanished, the temperature came back up, and the sound returned to normal. And the woman, of course, hadn't a clue what I'd sensed. So after she'd finished speaking, I said, well, that's fine. And I said, did anyone notice anything in the last couple of minutes? And the guy sitting beside me said, yeah, he said it went absolutely bitter cold. I said, did you notice anything about the sound? No, he said, no, nothing like that. And the other 2 people in the room hadn't noticed anything at all. But the guy sitting beside me noticed a sudden drop in temperature. I didn't say what had happened, didn't want to worry them. But I thought there's something very strange going on in this hotel. So we arranged to come back, which we did. And I went back with the 2 mediums. It was Anne-Marie and her now husband, Jim. Now, it was on the staircase was where they located the maximum, if you like, presence. Now, they said, and I've no way of vouching for this, but however, what happened a bit later might. She said, some young woman, she said, pregnant, fell down the staircase and died. She lost her life. She fell down the staircase and got killed. And she was pregnant. And now, she was going back, I guess, maybe about 150 years now. As you probably know then, you just didn't get pregnant outside wedlock. It was absolute anathema. It just didn't happen. And she was actually, but her father wanted her to get rid of the kid. And she hated him with a passion. She hated her father with an absolute passion. So, because she died in the staircase, she still harboured this hatred, and she was still on the staircase. Now, the odd thing that happened on the staircase, as far as I was concerned, was I was standing in the middle of the staircase with Anne-Marie, and her husband Jim was standing at the top of the staircase. And all of a sudden, a wind started to blow down the staircase. And I don't just mean a gentle a zephyr. This was a wind started to blow down the staircase. In fact, every single exposed piece of skin in my face and the back of my hands and stuff, it was like thousands of tiny needles were actually prickling away at me. And I went, bloody hell, I said, what's going on, Anne-Marie? She said, it's the woman, it's the girl. She's trying to push us off the staircase. She wants rid of us. So she said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and reunite her with the baby, you know. So she went down the staircase. I'm standing in the middle of the staircase. Jim is standing at the top of the staircase, and I'm standing there. And she didn't. What happened then was the temperature started to go up and down. The wind stopped, but the temperature started to go up and down, and I could smell things. I could smell like it was the smell of hot animals, horses for want of a better word, I guess. And I could smell also like hay, like the smell of fresh hay. As it turns out, the place used to be a farm at one time, but that's again another story. But all of a sudden, it was like the sense of like that sense of tension and pressure was building up and building. I could feel this tension around about me. You could almost cut it with a knife. Then all of a sudden, it just went, poof, it just dropped away. It vanished. It stopped. The temperature turned to normal and everything was fine. And before Anne-Marie told me this, I said, that's it, she's gone. And she said, I've reunited her with the dead baby. And that's it, she's gone. She's gone. I felt her go. And that took me right off the off the fence as far as, shall we say, presences are concerned. And it was, you know, it was absolutely, it was astounding. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And in fact, on that staircase, a little bit before we did this, I'd been filming the thing on video. And I saw a dark shape move down the staircase, stopped at the bottom, and then just vanished. And I told Anne-Marie and Jim about this, and they said, well, we didn't see anything, but she said it was possible that was meant for you to see, and only used for you to see. And that's why you picked up on the videotape, although when I viewed it back later, there was nothing to be seen on the videotape. But yet that hotel took me right off the fence, and it made an absolute believer out of me, because I'd always been a bit, you know, half-hearted about it. So I'm absolutely convinced that when we die, that part of us can be contacted, that our consciousness continues.
Well, I was just going to say that, Brian. I mean, what you're describing there doesn't seem like to be any interaction with somebody's consciousness.
No. Well, it can physically interact with you as well. Obviously, it can. Well, from what I've just said, but Phil, if I could answer that question, it would be me that's doing the interview. I'd be interviewing you.
No,
I don't know. I don't know.
I find it all fascinating, Brian. I'm not a skeptic. I just find it fascinating. I'm not convinced of the spirit world and life after death and things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm like yourself. I don't doubt that there is a phenomenon there. What it is, what causes it, what lies behind it, how it's created, I haven't got a clue. But it still fascinates me because it goes back to when I first became interested, which before the UFO subject, I used to go to the spiritualist church with my best friend's grandma, who used to live opposite to us. And I found it fascinating, but I listened to some of the messages she was giving to people, and I thought, well, it's a bit like your horoscope in the newspaper. That could have appealed to, a whole host of people. But nonetheless, I didn't think they were lying or creating things or making things up. And I still find it all fascinating. I did say right at the beginning, you may not agree with Brian this evening, but you're certainly going to learn something.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to say regarding spiritualist churches. Now, I can only recount this to you because I didn't experience this personally. This was a guy I was interviewing. It was actually at the time when I was doing this sort of stuff. Now, he was into spiritualism in quite a big way. He was also into ufology in a big way. And he went along to the spiritualist church. And he was sitting there because he was into ufology in quite a big way. And the medium that was on the stage picked him and said, "I've got a message for you." And she described the guy, and this was after Dr. Allan Hynek, as you probably know, you've probably heard of Hynek, that she was describing. Hynek was there with her, and the message that was coming from this Hynek was that he was keep looking at it was something he was investigating at the time. And he said, "You're absolutely right, because that's what was happening." And the medium also then turned and said, "There's something with him. It's much smaller and it's grey." And you think, wow, oh wow. And he said he felt himself going cold, absolutely chilled. And that way again, I mean, the medium didn't know him from Adam. This was the first time I'd ever been in the church. She singled him out. She seemed to be getting a message from the then recently deceased Allan Hynek, and a grey alien was with him. So what you make of that, I've no idea, and I can only take it at face value what the guy is telling me. But this is why I tend to think that there is no difference between paranormal phenomena and aspects of ufological phenomena. I think they're probably connected at some level. But I know you maybe disagree with that, Phil, and I respect you for that.
No, I don't necessarily, Brian. I mean, I've had the discussion with a number of people.
Yeah.
And there are those, I think we may have mentioned it in discussions on here, that the late Bud Hopkins, for example, was, I was on friendly terms with Bud. He's a lovely fella.
I've met the guy, nice guy. Yeah.
But he felt that, ufology was in one pigeonhole and the paranormal was in another pigeonhole. I remember discussing it with him. I said, well, perhaps perhaps the different sides of the same coin. And he called it stew-pot thinking. I think he even wrote an article in the MUFON Journal and called it stew-pot thinking. And I could understand where it was coming from, but I didn't necessarily agree with him. And that's why I think sometimes we tried in the days when I used to be a conference organizer, one of the early ones we did, we had aspects of Earth mysteries and the paranormal and the UFO subject all mixed into one. And it went down like a lead balloon because, the argument was, well, what have they got to do with each other? So people just didn't come.
And you lost money, oh dear. Even worse. Look, can I just interject at this point? Because I've found that when I give presentations, that the one that goes down the one that goes down the best, because I give a whole bunch of these presentations, it's one called Truth, Lies and Ufology, How the Intelligence Services Created the Modern UFO Myth. And because it's controversial, I have to supply proof. And I do. Okay, I prove what I'm actually saying. In fact, the last time I gave this particular conference, this particular presentation was a couple of years ago at a big conference that was organised in Stirling. And one of the guys in the audience, Nick Pope, was actually in the audience, but that's another story. He was actually listening to what I had to say, and he was seen to be writing furiously. And I'm adding this as an aside because some of the stuff that I was saying in this conference, the next time I saw Nick Pope on TV, he was saying exactly the same thing. So I'm leaving it at that. Okay, but another guy that was in the audience was it's Dave. He runs the Birmingham UFO group. Dave
Hodrian.
Yeah, Dave Hodrian. Dave actually came up to me and said, "You know, Brian," he said, "I may not agree with that." But it was extremely plausible. Okay, it's one of the most plausible arguments of its kind I've heard, and coming from Dave, indeed, it was praise indeed. And basically, what it was an aspect, and it's got nothing to do with the paranormal, but it's directly to do with ufology and how it's been exploited. And it was to do with the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947. When it is this is flying saucers. They weren't flying saucers for a kickoff. What they were roughly boomerang-shaped craft, because anything on the net you'll see Kenneth Arnold, he's pointing to like a flip chart, and now these roughly boomerang-shaped things is what he saw. So I started digging into this, and I came across something called the Horten 229, which is a design that came out in Nazi Germany, designed by the Horten brothers, a flying wing. Now, during Operation Paperclip, the whole aircraft, the whole Horten 229 was actually boxed up, crated up, and sent over to the USA and given to the Northrop Corporation, who actually rebuilt it. Actually built one of these things, and it's exactly like what Kenneth Arnold saw. Now, the only thing that's a bit different about it is if you look at the drawings of Kenneth Arnold's UFOs, there's like a circular section in the top. That's the only difference. Now, I was able to show that another of the things that came out in Nazi Germany was a design. I can't remember the guy who designed this thing, but it was a design of a ramjet aircraft that could do about 1,200, 1,400 miles an hour, or theory at least. And it too had this curious circular part on the top of the fuselage, which was actually the combustion chamber for the ramjet. Now, what Arnold seemed to have seen was a blend of the two, where the ramjet had been put into this flying wing. The real words was flying. I'm not going to talk boomerangs, they were flying wings. And that would have allowed it to do the speeds that you could see them doing, about 12 to 1,400 miles an hour, in theory. But the thing that comes after that is, well, what happened to them? Where did they go? Well, the thing is that a lot of experimental aircraft just don't get past the design stage for all sorts of reasons. Maybe it's not fuel efficient, maybe it can't carry the right sort of armament, maybe it's just not suitable for the job they're trying to get it to do. So I maintain that what Kenneth Arnold saw was not extraterrestrial, what was actually built by the Northrop Corporation. And from there, you sort of move on to, again, to Project Paperclip, and a lot of the stuff that was brought from Nazi Germany and landed in America and given to the big American corporations. For example, it's claimed that a lot of stuff was back-engineered for whatever came down in Roswell. Okay, and they're talking about transistors, they're talking about lasers, they're talking about microwaves, fiber optics, and all the rest of it. But the thing is that this technology was in a very primitive stage of development in Nazi Germany by Telefunken. Siemens was one group that was doing it. Telefunken was another. I mean, they had quite pure silicon discs that had been developed in Nazi Germany. They had tiny little, I suppose they'd be the predecessors of the transistor. I can't remember much of what they're called now, but we had them as well. But they were the size, say, of an egg cup, where the Nazis had them. They were the size of the tip of your finger. Klystron tubes? I think it was Klystron tubes they were called. And the Nazis actually had this stuff then. They were working on what seems to have been fiber optics. They were working on microwave transmissions. Well, that would be through radar, obviously. I mean, that's where that would come from. But the thing is, a lot of stuff that came out and was attributed to back-engineered ET technology was nothing of the kind. It was actually brought from Nazi Germany and given to the Americans under Project Paperclip. Now, if you think about it, what better way to disguise their work than say we are benefiting handsomely and billions and billions of dollars worth of stuff from imported Nazi technology than to blame it on UFOs and extraterrestrials, because it's a perfect guise for it. So I'm pretty sure that the stuff that is attributed to back-engineered alien technology was in fact came from Nazi Germany. And in the presentation, I actually prove this and actually show the actual the photographs of the stuff as it was taken back from Nazi Germany and what became of it. So this is why I think the intelligence, well, I'm not doubting for 1 minute that we are visited by things that don't belong in this reality. In other words, call them ETs if you like. But I'm pretty sure that we've been fed a lot of codswallop as far as a lot of ET contact. But again, it's a very it's an emotive subject. But at least Dave Hodgin was able to accept where it was coming from, and he said it was a very convincing, very plausibly argued argument. Not that I agree with a word of it, I might add, but yeah, it's somewhere I've been with this sort of stuff, because there's no two ways about it that the intelligence community has benefited handsomely from hiding its secrets in plain sight, if you like, and attributing it to UFOs. Because if you remember, in old UFO conferences, I mean, I've been there, I've seen it myself, when one of the first things the speakers would do would be to welcome anybody from the intelligence community who happened to be in the audience, because often they were. And the reason for that is to see just how well the disinformation was going, and just to see how people were buying into it. Because don't forget, a lot of these guys, a lot of these intelligence officers and intelligence groups, they were controlling the agenda, they were controlling the information, and they just wanted to see how well it was going, how well it was being accepted by the general public. And as I say, while I'm absolutely certain we are visited by entities from other realities, I'm also equally sure that the intelligence community has exploited the theories about it for their own ends, and they've done so very well. And the reason they don't do it now is because they don't think they need to, because most of the technology that we have just now, we wouldn't be seeing the benefits of that. The ultra-secret stuff we won't see for about the next 30 years or so before they finally got it in the air or whatever they're going to do with it. But I'm also equally sure that the intelligence community has exploited a lot of their stuff ruthlessly for their own ends.
I mean, I've been out to Roswell, Brian. I mean,
yeah.
And I wouldn't disagree with you. I mean, you know, Nick Redfern, for example, has written 2 books about it certainly was a man-made contraption that crashed at Roswell.
No.
And the one thing I could never get about Roswell, if it was an ET, let's say it was first contact, for sake of argument.
Okay, yeah, you're going to.
As those that believe in it claim it was, then rather than cover it up, I thought the Americans would have done the exact opposite, because the propaganda from it would have been enormous.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, the Cold War was just about starting, and can you imagine, Brian, you being the president of the US, and we have first contact, and it ends in catastrophe, but they came to America and not Russia. Can you imagine that, you know, and you could have done wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And guess what we found? You know what I mean? No, we got only our own nukes, but these guys brought along some stuff as well that we're working on.
Yeah.
It would have been tremendous, but that didn't happen. You know, according to people like the late Stanton Friedman and others, the cosmic Watergate was put in place within hours.
Oh, yeah.
Which to me doesn't make any sense at all.
Oh yeah, Phil, it does. It does, because don't forget, in America, you've got a whole bunch of evangelical right-wing Christians. Okay, now if you were to suggest that ET was out there and they were visiting us, and they had no religion, because I think one of the questions that I can't, and it was in the last couple of weeks I heard this talk about synchronicity. It was the last couple of weeks I heard this. And it was one of the questions that somebody would like to ask an ET if they ever got in contact with them. Do you have religion? Okay? Because if they do, it puts an entirely different spin on the whole concept of religion. Because if they don't, then it means that religion is entirely a man-made concept, or a human-made concept, shall we say. And if it doesn't exist on any other planet in the galaxy that we happen to get in contact with, then surely it means this presents a grave threat to the established religions on this planet. Because I have heard it said that, I think this came from the Vatican, if I remember rightly, I stand to be corrected, that what would they say if ET landed here and they found that they didn't believe in God? The answer that came from the Vatican is up to us to go and convert them. And you're thinking, what? You know, I mean,
yeah. Why not?
Yeah, why not? So that means feed them the same load of cods well they've been feeding us for years. But again, it's a subject's very emotive. But I'm pretty sure that the US would not have shouted about this for fear of upsetting, if you like, the religious right in America.
I'm actually I'm just going to jump in there because I'm not saying I disagree with you there, Brian, at all. But the biggest red flag for me, I'm not saying it isn't one of the Orton craft at all that Arnold saw, but what we've got to remember is there were probably only 2 or 3 of those built in Nazi Germany before they were defeated. Sure. Now, okay, they could strip them down, send them across to the States, but what we've got to remember is that Kenneth Arnold saw 9 of them flying in formation. Yes, they could have built some, and but wasn't the one a different shape altogether that he actually saw as well? And also, to me, it just seems an uncommonly large number of test aircraft. Usually they only build maybe 1 or 2 and try them. You try and fly them around, But Project 1947, which was undertaken as a response to the sightings of 1947, and although, as I say, flying wing craft are listed as possible sources for some of the sightings of that year, nothing was confirmed, and they out-and-out stated at the time that it wasn't a Horton wing responsible for Kenneth Arnold's sighting.
Well,
now who they are, I don't know, but there you go.
What we do know, though, Brian, which is kind of I'm on the fence here, but do know that certainly, I think it was the 1960s. It has been proven and admitted that the CIA did release fake UFO stories to cover up overflights of the spy plane.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So we know they have done that. And if we jump forward in time and come to our shores, and if we go to the events at Rendlesham Forest, one of the theories put forward in the early days that this was the same kind of thing, that something had gone wrong that was man-made at Rendlesham Forest. We don't know what that was, but the perfect cover-up was to call it a UFO or a flying saucer. So people would all go looking in the wrong direction. So that they literally did hide it in plain sight, so to speak. I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying it was one of a number of theories that was put forward to try and explain the events.
Phil, I wouldn't argue with that for 1 second, because for me, there are only 2 UFO-related events that I would say, I think you've heard me say this before, there are only 2 UFO-related events that I give any real credence to. One was Rendlesham, and the other one was the A70 case, because I happen to know one of the guys who was involved in that. I've spoken to him several times.
Is that Colin?
It's Colin, yeah. No, Gary Woods is the one.
Gary Wood, yeah.
Gary, yeah. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that guy absolutely, without a word of a doubt, is not telling a lie. He and the Colin Wright, I think, was the other guy. Without a shadow of a doubt, something happened to these guys. They saw, inverted commas, something. Now, the strange thing is, that area, a geomagnetic hotspot. Okay? Now, why this should be, I don't know, but Gary and Colin both saw something. They seem to have had this area, this period of missing time. Under hypnosis, which is a dangerous way of doing it, because it means, as we know, that I think there was a sort of it's not the best way of getting information out of people, because they tend to say what the questioner wants them to say, what they think the questioner wants to hear. But the information that came out of Gary, I think, came out under hypnosis, because I know the woman that carried it out. And without a shadow of a doubt, something happened to those guys, and I'd love to have been a fly in the wall to see what it was. But something happened. What it was, well, Gary's got his account, Colin's got his account, and they both seem to marry up with one another. So, yes, he seems to have been in contact with something. But the odd thing was, it didn't just stop with the first sighting, because as you probably know, that Gary had other things happening in the house and in his life at the same time that only followed on from this encounter with whatever it was. And it seemed as if that a doorway had opened for him, and he had been given access to a glimpse of another reality. And this seemed to follow him about for a while. I don't think it happens now, because I think it just all stopped eventually. But yeah, there was other, would better call them, I think, paranormal events rather than ufological events started happening after he had this encounter with whatever it was. That he saw this thing. But as I say, that is one of the few accounts that I would give any real credence to, and the other one is absolutely what happened in Rendlesham Forest. Now, I know that it might well have been, something very terrestrial that they tried to cover up, but whatever it wasn't behaving like a terrestrial craft, from what I can gather. I mean, I've spoken to some of the guys that were involved in it, and the account they give is pretty convincing. There's no two ways about it, because Rendlesham, as you probably know, has been called the British Roswell, and there's no two ways about it. It certainly was, because the effects of that still go on, and people still talk about it to this day. But as far as what happened at Roswell is concerned, there's been so much said about that, and so many different theories put forward, and so a lot of contradictory stuff's been put out, that I don't think we'll ever get to the truth of what happened at Roswell. Whether it was an ET craft or not, I don't know. Certainly Stan Friedman seemed to think it was, and he spent a lot of his life demonstrating the fact. There's the MJ12 documentation that seemed to be associated with it as well. That, again, appears to be genuine, but a lot of people say it's not genuine. The MJ12 documentation is part of the disinformation campaign. Then you had what happened to Paul Benevitz. What happened to that guy was shameful. There's absolutely no excuse for it. Richard Doty, who still turns up at UFO events and is still hailed as some sort of hero in some quarters, he wasn't. The guy exploited Benevitz for his own ends, and to me, what happened to, I mean, the literally drove the drive crazy. I mean, he wasn't. I think he was a bit unstable anyway, as far as I can make out. But they pushed him right over the edge. But there are only a handful of events that I think are worthy of any real ufological, ufological hotspots or ufological milestones.
Yeah. I've pretty much said the same myself. I wouldn't go down to just two. What I've said is myself that often ufologists quote that 95% of everything can be explained, and there's always. I don't know where they get these figures from at all. Yeah. I've often thought that what we'll call, the real UFO events are few and far between. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with you on the two that you've just mentioned. I think I met Gary once, and I met Colonel Holt again last year at Chris's conference, the Outer Limits magazine conference in Hull. Yeah, which not in Hull this year. It's in Pontefract in August. So let's get a plug in there. But
no, you're
Thank you, Phil.
What? Don't get me wrong, Brian. I'm not playing devil's advocate here. It just bothers me now. You have on the first night in Rendlesham, Jim Pennison and John Burroughs. They go into the woods after being alerted to these strange lights that's been seen. Mm-hmm. Now, Jim Pennison says he saw this craft. He touched it. It felt warm. He saw these symbols on it. He walked around it for about 45 minutes. He even drew it in his notebook.
Yep.
Yet his mate was only a few feet away from him. Said, I didn't see any of that. All I saw was some lights.
Yeah.
And I can't. I've discussed this with the two gentlemen, and in the end, they stopped talking to me because I couldn't get an answer out of them that seemed suitable. Yeah. And we also talked about the so-called landing marks. And I said, well, they would have to be thrown out as evidence because you never saw this thing touch the floor in the first place.
Yeah.
You've no idea whether those marks were there before you saw this thing.
Sure.
Plus, later in the night when the police were called out and they saw these marks, they said it was caused by rabbits. I'm not saying they were right. I'm just saying that others that were there that night had a different interpretation of them.
Sure.
So there's just little things like that bother me, Brian. And I don't know if how could one see a craft and the other sea lights. I'm open to ideas on that, and they're only stood a few feet apart.
Well, Phil, I think there was something else involved in this as well. I think the guy that touched the craft, is there not something happened? He's supposed to have had all this information downloaded into him from somewhere. Is that not part of that story as well that came out later?
Yes, he says that he went home and he'd had this code of zeros and ones downloaded.
Yeah,
and
he
wrote it down.
Yeah, binary
code. He wrote it down in his notebook from later, and he said he thought he was going mad.
Yeah.
However, he never mentioned it until 2010 or many years later.
Sure.
And when you see, it was at the anniversary conference they held in Suffolk, and he's not actually on the stage at this point. John Burroughs is taking questions, and somebody asks about the binary code, and he said, "Well, ask Jim." Jim Pennison had just walked in, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, "Didn't think it was important." Now, in one instance, he said it was so important he had to write it down straight away, and it almost drove him mad.
Yeah.
And then the next time, he's shrugging his shoulders and saying, "I didn't think it was important." I'm not saying he's making it up, or I would never accuse the gentleman of anything like that at all. I've said to both gentlemen, something truly bizarre happened to you that night. I don't know what. Even one of Britain's most famous skeptics, I won't mention his name, but in private, he's admitted to me that he has no idea what happened to those two gentlemen. He thinks he's got an explanation for what happened to Colonel Holt, but not for Pennison and Burroughs.
Sure.
And for him to admit that, even in private, took a lot of doing.
For sure.
But I'm just curious, mate. I'm just the way my mind works.
Phil, who's going to argue with you? You're absolutely right in what you're saying. But for me, the only two that really, I've had my own encounters, with, apart from that thing I saw as a child. I've also had lights in the sky that I've seen. And the odd thing was, the guy who was with me, in fact, the guy that was with me at the time, he just died earlier on this year, but the pair of us would both be about 18 or 19. We're walking back up, we'd been down the town, we're walking back up to the housing scheme we stayed in. And we just happened to be looking up at the sky at the same time, and went, "Oh, look at that." There was like two bright lights in the sky. They shot towards one another, they stopped, and they shot apart again. And we said, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What did we see?" And he didn't see them fly apart again. He said that they flew past one another. I saw them stop and flew apart. He said they flew past one another, but they were very, very quick and very, very bright. We both saw that. So we both saw the same incident. We both saw different things. So this is why I wonder if the guy that didn't see the markings on this craft or the craft itself, if it was not meant for him to see. This is what
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm trying to rationalise it, Phil. I'm just trying to give an explanation for it. I'm not saying you're right. It's absolutely 100%. That thing that I saw in the viewfinder of the video camera, this dark shape that came down that stair in the Highland Hotel, I was told by the medium it was meant for you to see, not for anyone else to see, which is why it wasn't seen by anybody else, nor was it picked up on the videotape. So it was meant for him to see. So I know this is where we're starting to get drift into the area of the paranormal rather than the ufological. But it is possible that they have mind control techniques that allow them to do this. Honest to God, Phil, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just. I don't know, mate. I'm just curious. I wouldn't rule it out, Brian. I'm not ruling anything out. It's just, it just fascinates me.
Oh yeah.
But again, it just seems to be like an obvious question to ask. I wasn't meaning any offence by asking that question.
Oh no, hell no, absolutely not. You're 100% right, mate. But it's just that the whole subject is bedeviled with these little anomalies, and it's the anomalies that create the interest, that keep people interested. Someone will, no matter what you say about a case, someone will always go, but this, but what about this, what about that? No case is absolutely watertight. No case is perfect. And I think this is what keeps us coming back to it all the time. I'll give you another example of this. And when we're talking about Second World War technologies, I think that I read the book called The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook, but one of the best. In fact, I wore the book out and I had to get another copy of it It was so good.
Are you sure it was that book?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely was, mate. The Hunt for Zero, the Hunt for Zero Point.
Yeah, whatever.
Which is about the Glock, the bell, okay, the Nazi bell, and this absolutely fascinated me. But when you see this on TV, the Glock, I mean, Igor Witkowski, who is, well, I think the guy that actually he brought it to a lot of people's attention, because he'd done a lot of this sort of stuff in that area. That it's been supposedly it's been a time travel device. It's been the propulsion system for some sort of spacecraft, and it's been variously claimed that who was the SS general, his name will come back to me, that he's supposed to have used it to escape the Allies and escape trials and all the rest of it, because he disappeared. And the Glock is supposed to have disappeared at the end of World War II and gone to places unknown. And there is also
now there's the report, Brian, of it landing somewhere in America in the 1960s.
No, you're absolutely right. At Kecksburg, that's right.
That's the one.
But the thing is that whatever landed in Kecksburg, I've heard it suggested it was actually a Russian satellite, and that the markings around the side of it, which were commented on, if they were in Russian and Cyrillic script, there would have been an alien writing, if you like, to Americans who wouldn't have a clue what the Cyrillic script looked like in the first place. But this De Glock, I did some real good digging into this, and the best explanation, or rational explanation they could come up with, is what it actually was a plasma centrifuge. Because as you probably know, the Nazis were not a kick in the backside of developing their own nuclear bomb. In fact, they'd carried out a couple of tests on an island, something up to in the sea, just up to the north of Germany, someplace. They'd actually carried out some tests of if you like, pre-nuclear devices, and they had to get weapons-grade uranium, obviously, to do this. And the Glock appears to have been, as I say, a plasma centrifuge that they would use as part of the process. But whether it was a time travel machine, I don't know. Probably not. Nick Cook implies that it might have been, because he implies that there were certain protocols had to be gone through every time they used this thing, that the radiation from it was absolutely horrendous, that plants died, animals died, and I think a lot of the scientists who were actually working with this thing became very ill. And also that the SS...
Brian, we're not going back to the Ark of the Covenant here, because that killed everybody that looked at it, didn't it?
Yeah, mate, it absolutely did. But the other thing is that a lot of the scientists who worked on the Glock project, that the SS shot them in case they fell into Russian hands, and they could give up the secrets to the Russians.
Do you not think, Brian, after all we've learned since the end of the war, that we give the Germans too much credit for things that they may or may not have been working on? I mean, let's put it at the end. Let's put the cards on the table. They lost, and they lost in a big way, And they knew they were going to lose from about 1942 onwards.
Oh, for a fair bit, yeah.
And it's the same the Japanese knew from the absolute start, from Pearl Harbor. They knew that they were going to lose. There was no winning.
Yeah.
So you don't think we give them a bit too much credit?
Well, as far we mentioned earlier about silicon chips, we mentioned about lasers, fiber optics. It is known that Siemens was working on that stuff, and Telefunken were working. They were working on the predecessors of that stuff. It was handed to the Americans, and the Americans made it work because they had the resources, the time, and the resources to do it. But the Germans didn't do it. The Nazis didn't do it because they didn't have the time, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the personnel. But I think they did a damn good job in what they did do, because okay, that they took some kicking. There's no two ways about it. But don't forget, that was one relatively small country taking on the entire world. And it took the combined forces of Britain, America, the Commonwealth as it was at the time, and every other free country that could lend a hand. It took that to put them down. But even to the last, they were still trying to develop this Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapons, and that was where, again, the Glock comes into that general heading. I'm pretty sure that the wonder weapon they were looking for was actually a nuclear bomb. Because because once they had a rocket, I mean, they had the V2, which was the most advanced at that time, which is another story because we start getting on to Werner von Braun, another committed Nazi that ended up in Germany and ended up in America and did very well out of it, along with another guy called Dornberger. But these guys, the whole V2 project, they were up to a V10. There was an America bomber. I mean, they even were trying to develop bombers to fly to America, and they were also the whole V weapon project, the rocket project. They were looking for, if you like, an ICBM. They were trying to develop as well, because if they could have got that to work, and if they could have developed a nuclear weapon to the point they could have stuck it on the end of the warhead of a rocket, they would have used it, no mistake, and that would have turned the war rapidly in their favour. Either that, or it would at least a level of savagery that we haven't seen and hope never will see to try and put them down again. But yeah, I mean, but we're starting to get into a subject that I'd rather not talk about, quite frankly. But I know I brought it up, but it's a difficult subject.
Well, what I'm going to do, Brian and Phil, because we've got about 33 minutes of the show left now, I wanted to talk to you, Brian, about Project Phenomena.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Evaluating
yeah,
Paranormal.
yeah.
Is this your latest publication?
That's the latest book. It came out in January of this year. And
do you want to give us a synopsis about
yeah.
it? And
of course, yeah, if I can. Basically, what it is we've been working on a lot of stuff. This came from stuff that a guy called gosh, I forgot Steve Mera and Don Phillips, the two guys that were actually involved in this. Now, Don Phillips had been doing stuff, pretty miraculous stuff, if you want, is the best way of putting it. But he'd been doing stuff that appeared to have no rational explanation. He was able to do this stuff, and you'll find him all over YouTube, Don Phillips. But he did a lot of this. He did a lot of the stuff that he did with this entity that calls itself Becky. Okay, now this entity Becky, he tied up with it, or it tied up with him at the point on a case he'd been on, and has been with him ever since. And he communicates with it via digital, Olympus digital recorders. And I've heard them doing this thing. And it also communicates him by what's called direct voice. It communicates with him at mid-air. And here, Steve's actually heard it do this. And the last time that Steve heard it, or the first time he heard it, was on a plane flying back from Seattle. Okay, they'd been out investigating this particular case. They actually had to go back to this particular case called Demons in Seattle. And this thing actually spoke to them at 40,000 feet in an aircraft flying back to London. Okay, and Steve heard it, and he got this. There was this. Wow, what was that? And Don just looked and said that was Becky. It actually spoke to him. But anyway, I've actually communicated with this thing via Skype. Would you believe? And it's the strangest thing. Not directly, but I was talking to Don on Skype. Don was talking to this Becky, and Becky was answering him. It's a really weird experience. And a couple of questions I asked this thing. Sometimes it'll answer, sometimes it won't. Or sometimes it gives you answers that are so like, they just don't make any sense. Didn't make any sense to me. Because I asked it, this Becky, via Dawn. I asked this Becky, I said, you've heard of the Nephilim, you've heard of the Watchers, and these things that are, spiritual, if you like, but they seem to come from another reality. Are you one of them? And the answer that came back was, and I heard it say this, is on the right lines. So you're saying, wow, woof, So this entity, Becky, has been with him, it's with him all the time, and it communicates with him, and it seems to help him, for want of a better word. Now, Steve and I have told him ad nauseum, don't believe what this thing tells you because you don't know what it is, but Don is sure he knows what it is. It's there to help him, and it doesn't say it's an angel, but it implies it's angelic, for want of a better word. Now, whether it is or not, to me, if it's implying it's angelic, there's a fair chance that it's not, because if it's not angelic, you don't know what it is. And we have told him repeatedly to leave it alone, but Don's quite happy with it, and good luck to him if he wants to get involved with this thing. Well and good. But as Steve's heard him talk to him. I've heard it talk to him, and I've heard it, as I said, on Skype doing it. So there's no two ways that he's in contact with something. However, Don asked Steve to get involved with him. And this is what the book is really about, is a scientific evaluation of the paranormal, or as scientific as we can make it, using the organisation that Steve represents. And we've come to a series of conclusions. I mean, so the cases that are in the book, there's two cases in particular that are pretty interesting. One is this, what I said about in Seattle. It's actually a suburb of Seattle called Bothell, and a guy called Keith Linder. The case, this place in Bothell, it was actually Ghost Adventures. That guy Zach Bagans, he does a show on it, and they turned up, and they investigated the case. And because it didn't go, they wanted it to go. They didn't say it was a fake, but they implied that Keith was making it up. But I'm absolutely certain he wasn't. And Don is also certain he wasn't. And Steve is also certain he wasn't. That's one of the cases I talk about in the book. Another case directly involving Don and Becky is what happened in Sligo in Ireland. That's where Barry Fitzgerald's involved in that case, and that's quite fascinating. But the whole thing about the Bothell case is that they had to go back again, and the second time they went back, they took Nick Kyle with them. Now, Nick at the time was the president of the Scottish version of the SPR. It was the SSPR, the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, and he went across with them as a sort of I don't know, as a referee, if you like, an impartial judge. Now, some of the stuff that happened when they were across there was quite fascinating. There was poltergeist effects happening in the house they were able to actually monitor and catch. And another thing that happened was one of the conversations, and this is what you start saying, what the hell is going on here? Because they were setting up cameras, infrared cameras, and one of the voices they heard on the tape said cameras, and the other voice said night vision. So these things seemed to be aware exactly what was happening in that house and what was the equipment that was getting installed in it. So why say one camera? That was an FLIR, the forward-looking infrared point, in fact, the camera was. And it says, the other voice is night vision. So it recognised it for what it was. But the most alarming aspect of that Bothell case was not what happened in Keith Linder's house. He actually eventually had to leave the house. And I think another group, it was a rented house. It wasn't his own house; it was a rented house. And he left, and I think other people, took over the rent and started living there. And he hasn't had the heart to go back and ask if anything was still going on in the house. He thought he'd be better leave it alone. But anyway, one of the things that happened to Don in particular was that they'd been out at a diner for a bite to eat. I think Don was meeting some people, and Steve was with them. And after they left, or they were just either the point of going for the meal or just coming out of the diner, and Don said, "These trees, there's something over those trees," and he said, "There's something, that there's bodies here, or there were bodies here." Anyway, they left it at that, and they go back in the car. They went back to Keith's house. Then at some point in the course of the evening, Don said, "I've got to go back there. I've got to go back there." So they got the person who had taken them out, and Steve said, "Well, I'll come with you," and said, "Right." So back out to this diner. It was closed by this time, but there was this tree obviously still there and stuff. So Don goes across, and he's got the recorder on. Now, Steve started to get genuinely alarmed by what was happening then, because the voices are saying, and he said it was as clear as clear as could be. He's standing about 15 feet from Don. They can hear this coming off the recorder. It's saying, "You belong to us. We want your power. You should be with us. We need you." And Steve said, Don, he said, "Stop this." He said, "Because this is not what I do. This is supernatural, not paranormal." He said, "I don't like this." He says, "Stop it." Well, Don said, "I think you best go and sit in the car then." So Steve went and sat in the car, and about 20 minutes later, Don came up and said, "That's it, they've gone." These things were, in effect, demonic. It's the only way you can put it, because we're starting to get into very, very grey areas here. But Don thinks that this entity, Becky, is there to help him. Okay, and to protect him from the worst effects of these things, because he has this conversation at night. He's in bed, he's lying with his wife, and these things he's talking on the recorder, chatting away to Becky, and occasionally, if the conversation, and it's thought, shall I say, Don is learning too much, He's come up with these things, these entities Don calls them lightertons or lightertons. And they seem to act as gatekeepers for what the information that's getting exchanged to Don from this Becky. And they just literally crash through, and the volume of the playback just shoots out through the roof. And these things that literally shut it down if they think that too much information is getting passed across. So there's no two ways about it that Don is in contact with something. And I've only covered two of the cases that he was involved with Steve. One in Southern Ireland, another one over in Bothell. But both of these are actually described in great detail in the book with three other cases. But another thing we've tried to do, the scientific side of it, is that poltergeist movements, as far as we can tell, don't obey physical laws. Because it's very seldom when something is moved through, if you like, poltergeist effects, you never see it taken off and landing. You either see it in the air and it lands. And this is where quantum entanglement comes back into it again, because it seems as though as soon as you see the thing in motion, it falls to the floor. In other words, you've interacted with it, you've seen it, and it stops. The interaction stops the movement and it falls to the floor. The other thing appears to be the sound these things make, because they found that one of the things that happened in Keith Linder's house was something fell to the floor. I think it was a picture jumped off a wall or an ornament or something, and it fell on the floor and clattered down. But the odd thing was that when they analysed the sound, the frequencies that this thing made as it fell, it didn't conform to what it should have sounded like. That they've actually tried dropping stuff on the floor and recording and looking at the actual wave patterns that it generates in an oscilloscope. And they're different to what poltergeist moves stuff, or stuff that moves and falls under poltergeist effects, does. The sounds are quite different. It seems as though that whatever making these sounds is creating them as analogues on one side of their reality and projecting them to our side of reality as an analogue of the sound. And it's not the same. They've actually found that these sounds that are produced through paranormal phenomena are always different from their equivalent produced in this, if you were to try and reproduce it, say you were hitting breaking a milk bottle or whatever. If that happened through a poltergeist effect and the sound was recorded, it would analyse differently from if you had done it with a hammer or it had happened through poltergeist effects. So it would appear that whatever is happening in our reality is an analogue of what's happening in their reality, which is, I know this sounds a bit off the wall and crazy, but it's the only explanation we can give for it. And we try and show this in the book. For example, another thing they did was they took a recorder, wrapped it in tinfoil, really wrapped it tight in tinfoil, put it in a sealed Ziploc bag, and immersed it in water and put something on top of it in a pail of water. And it would appear that the sounds that are being recorded on this recorder are not coming through the microphone. They're being put directly on the chips inside the actual unit itself, as if they're being pushed, recorded directly onto the chips, not through the microphone. So we don't know what's going on, but all we know is that there are distinct differences in the physics of what's actually happening compared to what should happen. That there's a completely new set of rules involved here, and we don't fully understand what they are. All that we know is they are different, and it is happening, and we can prove it through the different experiments that Steve's carried out. But other than that, the book itself details a lot of the stuff, the experiments that were carried out, the stuff that Don and Steve did, both visits to Bothell. Incidentally, the previous occupant in the house in Bothell that Keith Linder moved into, the lady, and she was having a lot of stuff happening in the house happening to her. And eventually she stepped out in front of a train, literally. She moved to another state. But she was so upset by the sounds of it, by what happened to her in this house, that she actually killed herself by stepping in front of a train, committed suicide. So something was happening to her, and Keith was aware of it before he even got into the house. But by the sounds of things, even the day and hour that Don and Steve arrived at the house, stuff was starting to happen. I mean, other things that happened to Keith Linder was Bibles would suddenly disappear. That was a fear that the Bible would disappear. And when they got it back, it'd be burned, as if somebody tried to set it on fire. There was objects getting embedded in the wall. like things getting hurled at the wall and sticking in the wall. They've got pictures of that. There was drawings appearing, and really, I've got them in the book. There was drawings appeared, and they seemed to have been stenciled onto the wall, for want of a better word. And samples were actually taken of these, of whatever made the marks, and they were analysed, and it just didn't conform to what you would expect. It wasn't paint. It certainly wasn't paint. They're not actually sure what it is that made the marks or how the marks were actually made, but I've got photographs of them in the book. But the whole thing that what was happening to Keith Linder, it can't have been dismissed. It can't be dismissed as just a hoax. It was definitely real, and it's the book describes that, but it looks at a whole other bunch of areas of paranormal phenomena. Yeah.
Excellent. The part of this, one of the experiments that you're actually doing, is the skull experiment, which is, if I remember it correctly, isn't that something to do with scientific examination of the possibility of life after death?
Well,
so how does that get involved then? What is it you're actually doing?
What happened in Skull? This was back in the 1990s, if I recall rightly. A place called Dith in Norfolk, the village of Skull, which is in Norfolk. The group, they set themselves up to actually investigate this. And in point of fact, Nick Kyle, who I mentioned earlier, he's trying to recreate the experiment now. He's trying to get a group of people together to actually carry this out here and try and do the same thing again. But the people in Skull, they had set up with, if you like, a spirit team that were helping them. And I use the term spirit team advisedly. But these were a group of people, or spirits, for want of a better word, who were trying to help them to actually demonstrate there was life on the other side. They carried out a series of experiments, and some of them involved, if you like, rolls of 35mm film inside boxes that were sealed up. And when they developed some of these rolls of film, they found there was images on them. There was like planets, there was like geometric shapes, all sorts of stuff on them. But one in particular, and this again is what really pricked my ears up, and the difference between, or the similarities between ufology and the paranormal, is that one of the entities on it they called blue, because there's like a wash of blue colour over the image. But blue is actually a grey alien. It's got the big eyes, the thin face, the bald head and all the rest of it. And you see this face looking at you. They called it blue purely because it's got a blue colour wash over it. But blue is a grey alien. And apparently, according to the information that we're getting from the spirit team, that we live in one band of our reality. And it's not the only one. There are several of them that run in parallel with ours. And these entities live there. Sometimes they can interact with us. Sometimes we can interact with them. But they have problems of their own because there are entities that live, if you like, in bands of reality alongside theirs that interfere with them as well. And some of the entities that live on their side, if you like, and the bands that are alongside them, they hate us, human beings. They hate us with a passion. And they hate us because we have emotions, we can feel things, and we experience things in the physical. They can't. And they hate us for it. And if they can mess with us, they will. And there's no two ways about it. And I think some of them probably do. And I can give you, I think we've still got a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you a first-hand example of this, okay? And I'd been writing a book. I'm just trying to remind which one it actually was. I think it was actually The Dark Messiah, Magic, Gnosis and Religion. And I'd been doing a piece on the Black Mass, right? And I'd spent a week researching the thing, writing it up. And I just finished the chapter. I just hit the final full stop, click, when all of a sudden I went cold from the inside out. And I mean, in a split second, I went just stone cold. I went, oh no, don't tell me. Anyway, I started feeling okay, and it was fine. I went away and said, well, I hope it's going to be okay. Well, I think Nietzsche, it was, who said, battle not with monsters, lest you become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. Now, I think I gazed into the abyss and something saw me, and it let it be known that it had seen me, because that night, my wife and I went to bed as normal. 2 o'clock in the morning, we woke up, both of us, and we could hear the scratching coming from the floors, coming from the ceiling, coming from the walls. The room above us, which is a spare room now, it was one of the kids' bedrooms at one time, the room above us, we could hear something getting knocked about. There was something moving about in the room. and we were both terrified. It's the first time I've actually in all my life that I've been petrified, terrified to move, petrified with fear. I know exactly what it means now because it happened to me. And we couldn't move, and we couldn't sleep, so we just had to wait until it stopped, and eventually after about half an hour, it all stopped, and the thing went back to being calm again. So the following day, when my wife went to work, I didn't tell her about it at the time. I went round the house and I cleansed it. I cleansed every room in the house, and thank God nothing's ever happened like that again. It's happened previously when I was out in cases. I once brought something home with me that I had to get rid of, and I did. So my house had been cleansed twice, once through my own fault, and the second time because I'd been concentrating too much on one aspect of extremely negative aspect of black magic, if you will. So these things can and do interact with you, and they will interact with you.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Now, we've got roughly 10 minutes left, so what I wanted to do, Brian, I don't know if you've got any more questions, Phil, but
well,
what I wanted
not a
to
question.
do... Go
not a
ahead,
question
Phil.
as such, but when Brian was talking about the poltergeist things not doing what they should expect in our physics, kind of reminded me a little bit of what Dr. Eddie Bullard did in his study on alien abductions. And one of the things there, he nicknamed it, I don't know if you're aware, Brian, but what he did, this is like a statistical breakdown of the way an alien abduction takes place. Forget the narrative within it, but it goes through a certain form, and it always does that. And it doesn't always have the same denominations in it. But one of the things it didn't have, and it just reminded me what you were talking about there, and he called it doorway amnesia. And he said, all the abductees said, yeah, I went up, and then I'm inside the craft. But they have no recollection of actually going through the door.
Sure.
And it just reminded me exactly of what you were talking about there. Quantum entanglement. I'll not forget that phrase in a long time. I can assure you. But it just I don't know if there's. I'm not saying there's a connection. But it just seemed to hit home as soon as you started talking about it.
Well, strangely enough, Phil, there's an aspect of this which we also know. There's a phenomenon, a paranormal phenomenon, which is called an apport. Okay, that's when objects spontaneously appear in a room, and they're always warm to the touch. Always, never cold. Always warm to the touch. This is because we think that to get into the room, they've got to pass through solid walls, ceilings, whatever. Okay. So we think they're actually stripped down to their fundamental particles, transported through the solid object and reassembled again, and this produces heat, which is why they're warm to the touch. I just wonder if something similar has been happening to your abductees.
I don't know, mate. I don't know, but a few weeks back, Chris and I had Paul Sinclair as our guest, and Paul was telling us about a UFO case that it was investigating, but it also involved poltergeist activity.
Sure.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here, Chris. And again,
yes, certainly do. Paul will be talking about this at the conference.
Basically, a couple of lads worked in this large industrial unit. I think there were spray painters and things like that of large, buses and all this kind of stuff. And, money, coins would just, be thrown at them. But they never actually, like you said, they never actually saw them take off.
Sure.
And I think nuts and bolts came flying as well, and pictures. I think the calendar, they had a girly calendar on the wall, and they'd change it, but every time they went to look at it, it had always been put back to whatever this particular. I don't know if it was January, but the spooks must have missed January, But again, they never actually saw any of this stuff take off. It always came and landed, I find that fascinating. I really do.
Well,
also, just while you mentioned that, Phil, Brian was talking earlier on about air location. Now, this is up near the Flamborough Head location, where we have Rudstone Monolith, which is, again, an ancient monument, probably the tallest in the country, where there are also burial mounds up that area as well, which Paul has talked to us about before. And again, it's all in an area of unusual activity, so that connects to that as well.
Well, exactly. It'd be interesting to see if the area if there's a bit of geomagnetism, or if it's on the edge or part of a geomagnetic area. Be curious to find that out.
Now, just as now you've mentioned that, it does remind me when speaking privately with Paul, and I'm sure he won't mind me, mentioning this. There is allegedly an area in the North Sea, approximately 10 to 15 miles off the Flamborough Head, where you do get magnetic anomalies or
Sure.
electronic
Sure.
anomalies.
Well, it would certainly be par for the course. I mean, the more we find, the more we look at this subject, the more similarities we find that there are earth energies involved in this, there are subtle energies involved in it, and somehow, whatever these things are, they're able to exploit them for their own ends. How they do it, again, is a total mystery. But exploit them they do, and they do it quite successfully because they keep well, the UFOs. I don't think by the Bathgate Hills up at Cairn Papel, for example, I don't think there's so much ufological stuff happens there. But there are certainly sightings of this grey, silver, whatever it is seen on a regular basis. But there's other bits of, if you like, ghostly activity happen up there as well.
That's fascinating stuff. So, Brian, are you planning any more books? So, are you attending any conferences? Are you going to be speaking at any conferences?
I haven't, not this year. I sort of put it on the back burner because my memory is not what it was, and I can't give a presentation now just off cuff. I've got to do it off scripts and stick pretty rigidly to it. But I'm not doing any this year, but I'm always open to offers.
Okay, well, there you go. What are you? I mean, hang on, my mind's just gone blank. Then
I get that a lot.
there you go. I should have put a script down here, Brian.
Yeah. What I would say, Brian, is how does anybody find the magazine and your books?
Well,
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Phil,
okay,
thank
mate.
you.
Cool. As far as the magazine goes, it's Phenomena Magazine, all one word, phenomenamagazine.co.uk. If you go online, phenomenamagazine.co.uk, it'll take you straight to the website. The magazine is free, so you can download. It's been on the go for a couple of years before I get involved with it. But you can go back for like 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years, and download as many of the back issues as you want. They're all free, and it's www.phenomenamagazine.co.uk. If you want my books, well, I mean, I can't remember all the different. I have several publishers, but I think White Crow Books have published my last two, and CFZ Publishing have also, that's John Downs. He's published a couple of my books as well. So if you go into CFZ Publishing or White Crow Books, you'll get quite a few of my books there as well, if anybody's interested.
Okay, well, I'm sure people will be interested and they'll want to go across and have a look at those. When does the next issue of Phenomena come out?
The newest issue just came out, I guess, just a week ago. It's actually got a picture of Stanton Friedman in the front and the memorial. Yeah,
oh, yes,
you saw that one.
Yeah.
And
yeah, well, OLM magazine has got the Stanton on the front as well. That came out about the same time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, the next one will be out towards the end of this month, and like I say, if anybody wants to get in contact with me, it's bjallan@aol.com or Paratech7. That's PARATEC, the number 7 at AOL.com. If they just give me a shout, drop me a line, I'll put them on the mailing list, and that means I'll be kept updated when every issue is due to come out.
And I can say, folks, I've actually been on that mailing list myself for quite a number of years, and it is always a very interesting read.
And I can confirm that I'm on the mailing list, and no matter how much I pay this young man, he will not take me off it.
He won't take you off. Oh, cool. Dear me. Can you give us any sneak previews of the next issue, Brian?
Oh, gosh.
Are you working on it?
Well, we're still working on it. In point of fact, I just put it up on Dropbox and sent it to the designer. Do you know what? I'm not lying to you. I can't even remember what's in it because I'm actually working on next December's edition. Put it that way. I mean, I work like 6 months ahead, and just update stuff as I get it. If I thought, we'll just swap stuff around, but I couldn't actually tell you offhand precisely what's in the next issue because I can't remember. Quite honestly.
Okay. Well, I tend to work on each issue of Outer Limits magazine as it's
Yeah.
coming up, basically, because I don't get that far ahead. It's because I mean, obviously things can
Oh
happen.
yeah.
Like the unfortunate passing of
Yeah.
Stanton. So I had to change a couple of articles out of
Sure.
the magazine, as I'm sure
Look,
yourself
yes,
did.
indeed.
With
Indeed.
Phenomena, and put something else in about Stan to
Yeah,
cover all
I
that.
did that. Well, I did also an in memorial, in memoriam piece about Stan. Just a few words,
Yeah.
but just to recognise the immense contribution that the guys made to the
Oh,
college.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He was a great believer of the
He
ETA,
was
wasn't
indeed. I thought, well, there again, we could have lots of arguments about that. I think.
he? Yeah. Well, that might be another show.
Absolutely. I've got no problems with ETH if somebody could prove me it was right. It's just the distances involved, and I know we're running out of time now, but the distances involved would have to involve time travel to some degree because of the sheer distances involved and the speeds involved in doing it. So, which is why I tend to think the ETH is maybe not as valid as we think it is. I think it's more an interdimensional thing.
Yeah, of course. There's always, the warp
Oh,
thing, isn't there, as well? They could do that
probably,
probably.
yeah.
Somebody has suggested at some point. So this is why this is a fascinating
Of course,
subject.
yeah.
And this is why on Inside Outer Limits magazine, the radio show, we actually do invite as many different people on to talk about the many different aspects, and I think I can personally say I've really, really enjoyed our discussion.
Likewise, yeah.
This evening. I don't know about Phil, mate. Have you
I
enjoyed it, or
no,
you just
I
kept
always,
with him?
in all honesty, I always enjoy listening to Brian. We
He's
do
good, isn't he?
disagree politely on certain things, but like I said, even though you may disagree, like the guy from Birmingham, Dave Hodrian, said, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
You will always learn something by listening to Brian, be it in a presentation like this online or in person. And I'm glad to say I've known him for a number of years now, and I hopefully there's many more years ahead, Brian.
I think it is, and hopefully one of these days you'll actually buy me that pint you promised me.
He's been on about this pint with 2 straws that I supposed to be. Allegedly, I agreed to buy him and his wife some years ago. I mean, it's an allegation I'm never going to escape from. I don't think.
No.
Well, don't forget you owe Malcolm Robinson a pint as well.
What for?
Well, I don't know. He keeps telling me you do.
I think he's dreaming. I really do. Brian's got more chance of getting one than Malcolm has.
God bless you. God bless you, Phil.
Dear. I thought he was going to say Brian's got 2 hopes of getting a drink out of you, one of them.
He's got
Bob.
2 chances, no chance and a dog's chance.
Small and none. Yeah.
Well, Brian Allan, author, investigator, editor. I don't know what else to say there. I just want to say thank you very much for joining us this evening on Inside Outer Limits radio show, and I wish you more power to your elbow, as I'm sure Phil does.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah, and perhaps we'll get you on again at some point in the future,
Chris,
and we can carry on these discussions.
What can I say, mate? Chris, Phil, thank you very much for had me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very
Cheers,
much
Brian.
for joining us this evening, Brian. All the
Take
best.
care.
Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Truth-proof series of paranormal publications written by Paul Sinclair are a classic piece of citizen investigation. Strange lights in the sky, people disappearing, big cats stalking the landscape, werewolves in the woods, fairy folklore, little humanoid creatures and landed UFOs all feature in this remarkable series of publications. This really is high strangeness galore. You can find Paul Sinclair and Truth Proof 1 and 2 on Amazon.